President Trump expected a casual, light-hearted panel, some laughs, a few playful comments, and maybe a jab at the British guard seated next to him. So when he leaned into the microphone and said, "These guys just stand there, right? Like statues. Even my wife couldn't get past one," the audience laughed along. But the guard didn't even blink. He sat perfectly still, unfazed, until Trump took one joke too far. That's when, for the first time in his 30-year career, Sergeant Declan Rowe broke protocol. He didn't respond with anger or insults, just a calm, powerful truth that neither Trump nor Melania expected to hear. And what he said live on national television didn't get cheers or laughter. It left Trump visibly shaken, not ridiculed, not challenged, just quietly, unmistakably exposed. Before we show you exactly what happened, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's dive in. Television has this unique ability to capture moments that change everything in an instant. One moment, the world is watching what appears to be routine political theater, and the next, history is being made right before our eyes. This particular day at Buckingham Palace would prove to be one of those defining moments that nobody could have predicted. The stage was perfectly set for what everyone expected to be another predictable diplomatic photo session. Donald Trump and his wife Melania had arrived at the historic palace for what was scheduled as a standard ceremonial visit with British officials. The familiar pageantry was all in place. Crimson carpets stretched across ancient cobblestones, photographers positioned at strategic angles, and those legendary royal sentries standing in perfect formation wearing their distinctive tall, black hats. However, anyone familiar with Trump's personality knew he possessed an almost compulsive need to turn every situation into his own personal performance. As news crews rolled their cameras and journalists prepared their questions, Trump's attention became increasingly fixated on the motionless guards. These highly disciplined soldiers, trained to maintain absolute stillness for hours regardless of weather conditions or external distractions, seemed to represent everything that irritated Trump about established traditions and formal procedures. The warning signs appeared when Trump began making exaggerated gestures toward the silent sentries while addressing the gathered media. That characteristic tone of mockery crept into his voice, the same condescending inflection that had become his signature in countless previous appearances. A slight smirk tugged at his lips as he prepared to transform these devoted servicemen into targets for his entertainment. The guards maintained their rigid posture, their gazes fixed straight ahead, their faces concealed in shadows beneath their ceremonial headgear. What Trump failed to comprehend was that these weren't merely decorative figures placed there for tourist photographs. These were battle-tested military professionals, individuals who had served in dangerous overseas deployments and earned their prestigious positions through years of unwavering commitment and personal sacrifice. They had maintained their posts through brutal weather conditions, endured countless attempts by visitors to break their concentration, and now faced their most challenging test yet, preserving their dignity while being openly ridiculed by someone who should have known better. The atmosphere in the palace courtyard began to shift. As Trump launched into his impromptu commentary, British officials exchanged worried glances, clearly sensing that their distinguished guest was approaching a boundary that diplomatic protocol demanded should remain uncrossed. Yet Trump, energized by what he mistakenly interpreted as an engaged and appreciative audience, pushed forward with his theatrical display. His voice carried across the courtyard with unmistakable disdain as he announced, "Just look at these individuals. Completely motionless, like sculptures in a museum. It's absolutely remarkable how they just stand there. I'm convinced they wouldn't budge even if someone detonated fireworks directly beside them." Nervous laughter rippled through the press gathering, reporters uncertain whether they were witnessing harmless commentary or something far more inappropriate. Meanwhile, the guards demonstrated their exceptional training by refusing to show even the slightest reaction to the verbal provocation. The situation took a more serious turn when Trump decided to share what he obviously considered an entertaining story from a previous diplomatic visit. His volume increased and his movements became more animated as he began recounting an incident clearly designed to portray himself as the victim of excessive security measures. "During our last visit to this place, one of these guards actually prevented Melania from moving freely. Can you imagine such treatment? My wife, the First Lady of the United States, being handled like some random trespasser, attempting to breach palace security." Murmurs of sympathy rose from portions of the crowd, several observers nodding in apparent agreement with Trump's expressed outrage. However, Careful observation would have revealed a subtle but significant change in one particular guard's demeanor. Not a physical movement exactly, but rather an alteration in the quality of his stillness. This was the same serviceman who had been present during the previous incident Trump was now describing, and his recollection of those events differed dramatically from the version being broadcast to the international media. Beneath his professional exterior, this guard, later identified as Sergeant James Whitmore, was grappling with an internal conflict that would ultimately define both his career and this entire diplomatic encounter. His military oath demanded absolute honesty and integrity, yet he was witnessing those very principles being violated in real time by someone who should have embodied the highest standards of leaders. The actual truth about that previous incident was creating an almost unbearable pressure within him, demanding acknowledgement and correction. Trump continued his performance with increasing enthusiasm, clearly relishing what he perceived as complete narrative control. This was a man who had spent his entire existence manipulating reality to serve his purposes, and he was now doing what came most naturally, rewriting recent history, to cast himself as the wronged party while painting everyone else as obstacles to his authority and dignity. Tension throughout the courtyard was becoming increasingly palpable, as seasoned journalists began recognizing the subtle signs that something significant was building beneath the surface of this supposedly routine event. Veterans of political reporting had covered enough Trump appearances to identify the telltale indicators. The way his voice escalated when he was embellishing details, the increasingly theatrical nature of his gestures when he was manipulating facts to suit his narrative. Sarah Mitchell, a veteran correspondent with decades of experience covering royal ceremonies and international diplomacy, made a split-second decision that would alter the trajectory of this entire visit. She had observed Trump's performance with mounting concern, recognizing that fundamental principles of respect and accuracy were being trampled. These guards represented centuries of honorable service and tradition, men who had earned their positions through dedication that Trump appeared incapable of understanding or appreciating. Stepping forward from the clustered press corps, Sarah's voice cut through Trump's ongoing monologue with the quiet authority that comes only from years of asking the difficult questions that others avoid. "Sir," she said, directing her inquiry toward the nearest guard, "can you verify the accuracy of Mr. Trump's account regarding the previous incident?" Complete silence descended upon the courtyard. Everyone present understood the established protocol. Ceremonial guards never spoke during official functions. They were living embodiments of discipline and tradition, trained to ignore every conceivable provocation and maintain their concentration regardless of circumstances. However, something about this particular moment felt fundamentally different from any that had come before. The guard Sarah had addressed was indeed Sergeant Whitmore, the same individual who had been directly involved in the incident Trump was misrepresenting. He now faced an impossible choice between his duty to remain silent and his deeper obligation to uphold truth and integrity. The weight of this decision seemed to hang in the air, like a physical presence, for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds were the distant hum of London traffic and the soft mechanical whirring of camera equipment. Trump's expression underwent a visible transformation from amusement to confusion, to something approaching genuine alarm as he realized the spotlight was no longer exclusively his to control. The guard remained motionless, yet there was something in his bearing that suggested an internal struggle of enormous proportions. Then, in a voice that was crystal clear, utterly professional, and completely unwavering, Sergeant Whitmore spoke, words that would echo round the world. "With all due respect, Mom, the incident described by Mr. Trump was not as he has portrayed it." The immediate aftermath of those words created an electric atmosphere that seemed to charge the very air around the palace. This wasn't simply a violation of ceremonial protocol. It represented a seismic shift in the balance between power and truth. A man bound by tradition to remain silent had found his voice, and he was using it to directly challenge one of the most influential figures on the planet. Trump's facial expression underwent a remarkable and visible transformation. The smugness and self-satisfaction that had defined his demeanor just moments earlier evaporated, replaced by something far more vulnerable. Genuine shock and disbelief. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound, as if his mind was struggling to process this unprecedented challenge to his authority. This was someone who had surrounded himself with individuals who reinforced his version of reality, and suddenly he was confronting someone who simply refused to participate in that charade. "What did you just say?" Trump finally managed to stammer, his voice betraying a crack of uncertainty that his supporters had rarely heard before. "What is this person talking about?" Even as he spoke, observers could see his mind racing to regain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his influence. The guard's simple statement had opened a door that could not be closed, and everyone present sensed that something irreversible was unfolding. Sergeant Whitmore, whose full name and background were still unknown to the assembled crowd, continued, with the same measured professionalism that had defined his entire military career. "Mrs. Trump attempted to access a restricted area during an active security operation. Standard protocol required immediate intervention." His words were delivered without emotional inflection, but their impact was absolutely devastating to Trump's carefully constructed narrative. Whispers began spreading throughout the courtyard like ripples across a pond. Reporters were frantically scribbling notes, while their minds raced to comprehend the full implications of what they were witnessing. This transcended a simple security incident. It raised fundamental questions about whether Trump could be trusted to provide accurate information about anything of significance. However, Sergeant Whitmore had not finished delivering his account. Having crossed the line from silence to speech, he appeared determined to provide the complete truth. Additionally, Mr. Trump was explicitly informed about the security breach, but chose to disregard that information. These words hung in the air like an accusation, a direct contradiction of everything Trump had claimed about his knowledge and involvement in the incident. The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to consume all other sound. Even the background noise of London seemed to pause, as if the entire city was holding its breath. Then, like a dam suddenly bursting under pressure, complete chaos erupted as reporters shouted questions over each other. Camera flashes created a strobe-like effect, and the distinctive sounds of social media notifications began emanating from devices throughout the crowd. What unfolded next would be replayed millions of times across every conceivable media platform and social network. Trump's face cycled through a visible spectrum of emotions, from pale shock to deep crimson fury, as the complete implications of the guard's statements penetrated his consciousness. This was an individual who had constructed his entire public persona around the concept of being perpetually in control, consistently the most informed person in any room, and always the one who determined how stories were told. Now, in front of the world's assembled media, he was being publicly contradicted by someone he had just been openly mocking. "That's completely false and absolute fabrication," Trump bellowed, his voice reverberating off the ancient palace walls. His finger jabbed accusingly toward the guard, who maintained perfect composure despite the verbal assault being directed at him. "This is fake news in its purest form. This guard is spreading completely fabricated information." Yet even as he spoke these words, observers could detect the desperation creeping into his voice. He was a man watching his carefully constructed version of reality crumble in real time. Before a global audience, British officials appeared mortified by the turn of events. What had been planned as a straightforward diplomatic visit designed to strengthen international relationships was rapidly transforming into a public relations catastrophe that would dominate news cycles for days to come. Diplomatic protocol demanded they intervene to restore order, but the damage had already been inflicted. The truth was now in the public domain, spreading across the internet at unprecedented speed. Within minutes, the hashtag #GuardGate was trending across every major social media platform worldwide. The video clip of the guard statement was being shared, retweeted, and reposted faster than any tracking system could monitor. Internet users began creating memes almost immediately. Trump's shocked expression contrasted against the guard's stoic professionalism became a symbol representing truth confronting unchecked power. News anchors across the globe were scrambling to analyze what they were characterizing as an unprecedented breach of royal protocol, with potentially massive political ramifications. Meanwhile, Trump's social media management team was experiencing complete panic. They had successfully navigated countless controversies throughout his presidency, but this situation presented unique challenges. This wasn't about interpretation or political spin. It involved a direct, public contradiction of their boss's statements by someone whose entire reputation was built upon honor and integrity. How could they possibly combat truth when it was being delivered by someone with absolutely no motivation to deceive? The response, predictably, was for Trump to employ his standard strategy: escalation and doubling down. His smartphone appeared in his hands with remarkable speed, and within moments, a barrage of tweets began flooding his account. Absolutely disgraceful. These so-called guards demonstrate no respect whatsoever. The corrupt fake news media is exploiting them to spread lies about your favorite president. Completely sad. The all-caps fury was almost tangible through the screen, but it only seemed to amplify the magnitude of the situation rather than resolve it. While Trump's social media meltdown continued unfolding in real time, something even more damaging was developing behind the scenes. Security footage from the previous visit was being carefully reviewed by British palace officials, and what they discovered was about to transform Trump's difficult day into a complete catastrophe. The video evidence clearly documented the incident exactly as Sergeant Whitmore had described it, and someone within the system had decided that global transparency was more important than diplomatic discretion. The footage leak originated from an anonymous source deep within the palace security apparatus, someone who had witnessed Trump's performance with growing disgust and concluded that truth deserved to triumph over political convenience. The video quality was somewhat grainy due to the security camera specifications, but it was clear enough to show Melania Trump walking confidently toward a clearly marked restricted area, complete with visible security barriers and prominent warning signage. Sergeant Whitmore could be seen approaching her with professional courtesy, gently but firmly guiding her back toward the designated public area. The most damaging element of the footage was what it revealed about Trump's own behavior during the incident. The video clearly showed him in the background, obviously aware of the developing situation but choosing to remain passive until after his wife had been redirected by security personnel. Only after Melania had been guided away from the restricted area did Trump storm over, his face already displaying obvious anger, launching into what appeared to be a heated confrontation with the security staff. While the video lacked audio, Trump's body language told the complete story. This wasn't a husband defending his wife's honor, but rather a man furious about being publicly embarrassed. When this footage hit social media platforms, the reaction was immediate and absolutely devastating to Trump's credibility. The hashtag #TrumpLies began trending alongside #GuardGate, and political commentators across the entire political spectrum were describing it as one of the most clear-cut examples of presidential dishonesty ever captured on video. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Trump's theatrical performance from just hours earlier, portraying himself as the victim of excessive security measures, was now being directly contradicted by video evidence showing he had been fully aware of the situation and had deliberately chosen to misrepresent it. Television news anchors were treating the story as a major breaking news event. This raises serious questions about Trump's respect for established security protocols and his fundamental commitment to honesty, declared Anderson Cooper during a specially scheduled CNN breaking news segment. "We're witnessing a sitting president who was caught on camera deliberately misrepresenting a security incident, and who was then publicly corrected by a royal guard willing to risk his career to ensure truth prevailed." The international implications were staggering in their scope. An American president was being publicly humiliated by the British military, not through any conspiracy or political maneuvering, but simply through one honest individual's refusal to allow lies to stand unchallenged. Diplomatic relations between the two historically allied nations were being strained not by policy disagreements or strategic differences, but by Trump's apparent inability to tell the truth about a straightforward security incident. The immediate aftermath of the guard's revelation was creating ripple effects across multiple fronts simultaneously. Trump's entourage had shifted into full damage control mode, but their efforts were being systematically undermined by their boss's continued insistence on making the situation progressively worse, even as his closest advisors pleaded with him to allow the story to fade from public attention. Trump continued his social media assault, each new post adding fuel to the fire he was supposedly trying to extinguish. The journey back to the American embassy was described by those present as absolutely excruciating. Melania Trump maintained complete silence throughout the ride, her expression concealed behind oversized designer sunglasses, but her body language communicated volumes about her emotional state. Sources with close access to the couple would later describe the atmosphere as suffocating, with Trump delivering an uninterrupted rant about the disrespectful guard, while his wife stared out the window, refusing to engage with his version of events. Melania's silence was particularly significant because it represented a departure from her usual pattern of supporting her husband's public statements, even when they strained credibility. Those who understood her personality, recognized that she took considerable pride in her knowledge of proper protocol and appropriate behavior in formal settings. Being inadvertently caught in her husband's fabrication about a security incident had clearly struck a particularly sensitive nerve. Back at Buckingham Palace, Sergeant Whitmore had returned to his assigned post as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. His fellow guards maintained their positions with the same stoic professionalism that had defined their service for centuries. But something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere. Word was spreading through the military ranks that one of their own had confronted the most powerful individual in the world and had emerged victorious. It was a moment of quiet pride that would be remembered and discussed within the regiment for generations to come. The British government found itself in an extraordinarily delicate position, scrambling to manage the diplomatic fallout while maintaining the appearance of normal international relations. While many officials privately admired Whitmore's courage and integrity, publicly they were obligated to maintain the diplomatic fiction that this represented merely an unfortunate misunderstanding between allies. Carefully worded press releases were hastily drafted, emphasizing the historically strong relationship between the two nations, while studiously avoiding any direct commentary on the truthfulness of either Trump's original claims or the Guards' contradictory statements. However, the damage to Trump's credibility was expanding far beyond the immediate incident. Political opponents were seizing upon the video footage as definitive proof of a pattern of dishonesty that went to the very core of his presidency. If he's willing to lie about something this trivial, this easily verifiable, what else has he been lying about? Demanded House Speaker Nancy Pelosi during a hastily arranged press conference. The question resonated in the political atmosphere like a challenge, one that Trump supporters would struggle to answer convincingly. As the news cycle continued its relentless momentum, investigative journalists began conducting deeper research into the story, uncovering additional details that made Trump's version of events appear even more absurd and self-serving. It was revealed that the restricted area Melania had attempted to enter was actually a secure zone, where sensitive government documents were being discussed. As part of ongoing diplomatic negotiations, the security protocols weren't arbitrary bureaucratic obstacles. They were genuine national security measures designed to protect classified information from unauthorized access. The revelation that Trump had been willing to misrepresent a legitimate national security incident for the sake of his own ego sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. Current and former officials spoke anonymously about their growing concerns that a president who would lie about something so easily verifiable might not be trustworthy. With more sensitive information, the implications were staggering. If Trump was prepared to publicly attack security personnel for properly performing their duties, how could intelligence agencies trust him to protect their operations and personnel in the future? Meanwhile, the story was developing its own momentum in popular culture. Late-night television hosts were having an absolute field day with the footage, and comedians were transforming Trump's public meltdown into comedy gold. "Let me understand this correctly," joked Stephen Colbert during The Late Show. "Trump got completely destroyed by someone who isn't even permitted to move. That's like losing a staring contest to a department store mannequin." Beneath the humor, however, was a more serious observation that wasn't lost on anyone paying careful attention. This wasn't merely about Trump being embarrassed in public. It was about the fundamental question of whether truth still maintained any relevance in American political discourse. Sergeant Whitmore had risked his military career to ensure truth prevailed, and in doing so, he had demonstrated a level of personal integrity that seemed increasingly rare in contemporary public life. The international reaction was equally revealing. European leaders, while maintaining diplomatic courtesy in their official statements, were privately expressing serious concerns about America's reliability as a strategic ally. If the American president was willing to lie about something this inconsequential, how could they trust him on matters of genuine international importance? The incident was becoming a symbol of the broader challenges facing American leadership credibility. On the world stage, social media was exploding with tributes to Sergeant Whitmore's courage and integrity. The hashtag #GuardianOfTruth became a trending topic, with users sharing personal stories of other occasions when ordinary individuals had found the courage to stand up to powerful authority figures. The guard himself remained characteristically silent, continuing to perform his duties with the same quiet professionalism he had always demonstrated. But his actions had inspired millions of people around the world to reconsider the importance of truth over convenience. As the story entered its second day of intensive media coverage, new revelations continued emerging that made Trump's position increasingly untenable. Palace sources, speaking under strict conditions of anonymity, revealed that this incident was far from the first time Trump had clashed with security personnel during his visits to the United Kingdom. Previous incidents had been handled discreetly through diplomatic channels, with British officials working behind the scenes to smooth over any misunderstandings or cultural conflicts. However, Trump's public attack on the Guard's professionalism had crossed a line that simply could not be ignored or quietly resolved. The most damaging revelation came from a former Secret Service agent who had been personally present during several of Trump's overseas diplomatic visits. Speaking in an exclusive interview with CNN, the agent described a disturbing pattern of behavior in which Trump would regularly ignore established security protocols and then blame the security personnel when inevitable problems rose. He seemed to believe that being president meant he could do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, regardless of the security implications for himself or others, the agent explained. And when that approach inevitably caused problems or complications, he would always find someone else to blame for the consequences. The agent's revelations painted a deeply troubling picture of a president who viewed security protocols not as necessary protections designed to keep him safe, but as personal inconveniences to be ignored or overcome through sheer force of will. This wasn't just about one isolated incident at Buckingham Palace. It was about a fundamental misunderstanding of the responsibilities and limitations that came with his office. The implications for national security were staggering, and intelligence officials were privately expressing concerns that had been building for years. Trump's attempts to control the narrative were becoming increasingly desperate and erratic. His social media posts were growing more frantic, with late-night tweet storms that seemed to make the situation worse with each passing hour. "The so-called Royal Guard is probably a Democrat plant sent to make me look bad," he posted at 3 a.m., followed shortly by, "Someone needs to investigate this guard. Find out who he voted for and who's paying him." The tweets were being immediately screenshot and shared as examples of a president completely losing control of his own narrative. The British government was maintaining its diplomatic silence in official channels, but behind the scenes, government officials were describing the situation as unprecedented and deeply concerning for future diplomatic relations. The idea that an American president would publicly attack a British serviceman for properly performing his duties was viewed as a serious violation of the special relationship between the two nations. While no formal diplomatic complaints were filed, the damage to long-term bilateral relations was both real and lasting. Back in the United States, political analysts were describing the incident as potentially the most damaging of Trump's entire presidency, not because of its inherent importance in terms of policy or governance, but because of its absolute clarity and undeniability. This wasn't a complex policy dispute that could be interpreted different ways, or a nuanced legal issue that required expert analysis. It was a straightforward case of a president being caught in an obvious lie and then having a very public, emotional meltdown when confronted with irrefutable evidence of his dishonesty. The final chapter of this extraordinary drama unfolded over the following weeks. As the long-term implications of the incident became increasingly clear across multiple spheres of influence, Sergeant Whitmore, who had never sought public attention or recognition, found himself reluctantly thrust into the role of an unlikely international hero. Veterans organizations on both sides of the Atlantic praised his courage and integrity, and he received thousands of letters from ordinary citizens thanking him for his service and his unwavering commitment to truth. The British military establishment, while maintaining its traditional silence on political matters, quietly made it abundantly clear that Whitmore's actions had been entirely appropriate and that he had their complete institutional support. His decision to speak out had been made in the heat of the moment, driven by conscience rather than calculation, but it had been absolutely the right decision both morally and professionally. The regiment's honor and reputation had been unfairly impugned, and he had defended it in the only way possible under the circumstances. Trump's credibility, meanwhile, never fully recovered from the incident's devastating impact. The video footage had been too clear, the contradiction too obvious and undeniable, for even his most loyal supporters to completely ignore. While many continued to support him politically out of partisan loyalty, the incident had planted a seed of doubt that would continue growing over time. If he was willing to lie about something this trivial and easily disprovable, what else might he be lying about regarding more important matters? The incident also had profound implications for American foreign policy and international relations. Allied nations began viewing Trump's statements and commitments with increased skepticism, knowing that his version of events might not accurately reflect reality. The damage to America's soft power and international credibility was significant and lasting, representing an erosion of trust that would require years of consistent behavior to rebuild. Perhaps most importantly, the incident had demonstrated that truth still possessed real power, even in an age of alternative facts and partisan media manipulation. One honest individual, willing to risk his career and personal security to tell the truth, had accomplished what months of political opposition and media criticism had failed to achieve. He had shown the world that the emperor had no clothes, and in doing so, he had struck a powerful blow for integrity and honesty that would resonate for generations to come. As the dust settled and the relentless news cycle moved on to cover other developing stories, Sergeant Whitmore quietly returned to his regular duties at Buckingham Palace, standing guard with the same dedication and professionalism that his predecessors had demonstrated for centuries. However, his brief moment of courage had fundamentally changed something in the relationship between power and truth. He had proven that sometimes, in the right circumstances, truth was strong enough to topple even the most powerful and well-constructed lies. The guard stood in silence once again, but his silence now carried an entirely different meaning and significance. It was no longer the silence of subservience or unquestioning obedience, but rather the silence of dignity, the quiet confidence of an individual who had done his duty and could face the future with his head held high and his conscience clear. And in that profound silence, there was a lesson for all of us about the enduring power of truth, the fundamental importance of personal integrity, and the courage it takes to stand up for what is right, even when the entire world is watching, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The ancient ceremony of changing the guard continued as it had for centuries, but now it carried renewed significance and deeper meaning. These were not merely ceremonial figures placed there for tourist entertainment. They were guardians of something far more precious than buildings or material treasures. They were guardians of truth itself, protectors of integrity and honor, and they could not and would not be moved from their sacred duty